They're not born into the world knowing how to be respectful. They have to be taught how to be respectful, and they're taught by our example.
By dealing with disrespect clearly and directly and right away, the message goes out to the person who's hurt, to the person who's going to hurt, and to all the others in the room.
The students need to feel safe, and they need to feel like they're in a safe environment so that they can get out of it what they need, or they can succeed. That's something I need to do. That's something I need to teach.
Most of the conversations now in the current climate of high-stakes testing is how high do we want them to score on standardized tests. That's a good conversation, but it also has to be accompanied by a conversation that says, what type of people do we want our children to become?
My students were making class presentations. While Annette was speaking, somebody in the back made snorting noises like a pig, and kids started laughing.
I think our natural tendency sometimes when we see someone shamed or humiliated is to pull back and look away, the terrible fear that will make it worse somehow. And what happens, it's kind of a double then, because the person is shamed, and then they also feel like nobody noticed or nobody else thought that was terrible. So it's really important to connect.
Often they'll say, I don't want to deal with it, it's just too embarrassing. Sometimes that you can say, though, you know, I think it would help if we really talked about this. Would you let me be your voice? Would you let us use this as an example? Because the whole community could learn from this, the whole classroom could learn from this. And more often than not, I've noticed that they'll let me do that.
If you see a situation like that, I think it's important enough to stop the class and say, listen, is that what we're about? Is this a classroom where people are respected regardless? Or is this a classroom where we can hurt people?
How can disrespect, what you were saying, just by respecting someone's property, lead to something so bad, something so violent? Casey?
Well, because like if you like call someone a name or like disrespect their property, you know, they can like get really mad at you and like take it like too offensive, and then like it can like lead to violence by like a fight or whatever.
Unfortunately, a lot of the kids, particularly some of the urban kids, they kill each other over what they call respect. And that's not really respect. It's the notion that you have to acknowledge my power or my juice, so to speak, to use street term, as opposed to you have to acknowledge my humanity.
Many kids have confused intimidation with respect. And I talk to a lot of kids, even older kids, that they think that if I'm afraid of you, that means that I respect you. And I'd really disagree with that and tell them why I disagree with that. And that intimidation doesn't have anything to do with respect, and that respect has much more to do with courage to be oneself.
And what often happens in schools, that respect is defined as pay attention, come to school every day, don't talk back, and that sort of thing. But I believe that Roger's notion of positive regard is really what should be the operative measure of respect, that in a school environment, every person, regardless of the person's age, gender, position, role, every person should be respected.
Students at my school talk more crudely every year. I hear African American students calling each other the N-word. I hear boys and girls addressing girls as slut and other derogatory terms. And it seems like no one takes offense.
The N-word is something that I can never understand why a young African-American child would use that word, because it was a word used to oppress. It's a denotation of inferiority. And someone said it was the last thing that a black man heard before he was lynched.
Discussing and teaching the historical elements of that, and teaching the history involved with trying to get away from being called such a nasty name for so many years, that why would we want to bring it back, and why would we want to make it okay?
As far as like the use of racial slurs amongst individuals that are comfortable saying it to each other, I would comment on it, and I would tell them that at school that is inappropriate, just like if they were at work, it would be inappropriate and not acceptable.
I'll just say, I don't find that funny. I find it offensive. So around here it doesn't happen. So I'd like for you please to not do that, even if you don't mean anything.
We have a responsibility because the word precedes something else. Not only that, but the word suggests an attitude about the object that one is describing that at some point will be translated into action.
You know, I give them other words. Well, what are you feeling? What do you want to say? Oh, well, I was just calling my friend over. Well, then just call your friend over. Just use their name. That's much easier and it's much more respectful.
A lot of people say, I don't want to get involved in that. I'm not going to get pushed up against a locker. I'm not going to have my feelings hurt. I'm not going to have my physical safety jeopardized. So it's easier for me to ignore it.
On a conscious level, there's always the pressure of time. I've got 3 more topics to do today. It's 9:15. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't even want to open that one. Then along with that comes kids will be kids. I'll pick it up at another time. It's not my job, it's parents' job. Sometimes there's some active fear, particularly if it's a large kid or a threatening kid, is I don't want to mess with this kid, I want to go home, I've got my own kids, I don't need this. But there's some unconscious things that have to do with how you were raised to deal with conflict and confrontation.
Okay, where is it? They took it. What are you talking about? Get out of my locker! Get off the Why are you touching my locker?
What is this all about?
Ask her. She started it.
No, I didn't. It was you.
See? She took my social studies report. Jasmine helped her.
Lindsay, take this to Mr. Thomas. Karen and Jasmine, you two, come with me.
Now, the ones that they respect are the ones who set boundaries. They know what the needs are. They know what life is really like. And they say, listen, I'm not going to allow you to unwittingly be a part of a conspiracy to destroy yourself. And it's hard to take children who would like to take shortcuts and say, you're going to have to take the long way on this one. You're going to have to write this paper, or you're going to have to study for this exam.
Because I grew up and I was taught in the 60s that if you just love the kids enough, everything's going to be okay. And I do believe that we have to love the kids and that respect is about loving, even if we don't like them. But I learned that it's not just about just loving. It's about setting limits. It's about having rules. It's about being really consistent. It's about really saying, I love you enough to say that you're not going to do that in my presence.
All right, class. Please open your textbooks to Chapter 3, page 32.
I was reviewing the homework assignment, and one of my students went ballistic, yelling about the work, carrying on in Technicolor 4-letter words in front of the entire class.
Sometimes that student maybe just needs to let off steam or to step away for a while. And I have let students just go outside for a minute, maybe with a friend, and try to discuss what they're feeling or what's happening. And then while they're doing that, I will take that time to deal with it with the class.
If students were present, I would probably ask that individual to step into the hallway so I could have a personal conference with them.
I have to say right away, that is not okay. I'm having a hard time here. You know that's not acceptable here. Depending on how they dealt with it, you could have a student who's out of control in middle school. You could have a lot of kids doing drugs and other kinds of things. And so if it really escalated and it became very belligerent, I would probably get help and have the student removed from the class, as opposed to a kid who's just kind of testing the waters and would stop immediately.
Listen, I want to have a word with you. You got a minute? Sure. When I spoke to that individual outdoors privately, I would explain to him how by using such foul language and everything, not only do they hurt others, but they also are really hurting themselves, because when individuals do use foul language on a consistent basis, they are judged by other people and judged in a negative fashion.
They just use them because that's what everybody uses and all their friends use. And I also think they do it to really get a rise out of adults. My advice has always been to adults, try not to get so offended by it, and don't come from the offended place.
There's something in human behavior called flight or fight. And what you don't want to do in a classroom is get into a fight mode where there's a contest. The classroom is contested terrain between the teacher and the students.
A French teacher once told me this story. She said every year at the beginning of school, she always says bonjour, and then the student says bonjour back and bonjour to the next one. She gets to the third student, and he said, you know, the F word. And she said, stick around, I'll teach you to say that in French. And I've always liked that story because it was an invitation to the student rather than an exclusion. And that's tricky because I know for some teachers it's really a point of respect and honor. But bottom line for me, I'm always thinking, how can I invite this kid? How can I encourage this kid, particularly if it's a alienated or hostile or sullen student? I don't want to do more to exclude them. On the other hand, I have to be clear about what my boundaries are.
One of my students seems so unhappy. I ask him what's going on and never get an answer. He's kind of small, and I think some of the other kids are picking on him, although I don't have any direct proof.
Bullying means that two people of perceived difference in power or strength are, over time, having some kind of conflict, and one person picking on another person over time. And that there is an inequity of power, and because of that, the only thing that can help make that power struggle more equal is the intervention of an adult.
For some kids, it's really ignorance. They don't recognize that what they're doing really has an impact on somebody else. They get a few laughs, they feel like they get some attention, and they really don't understand. And I think there's another whole group of kids who do it with intentionality. They intend to humiliate and shame and embarrass other people, makes them feel superior and more powerful. And those are two separate groups. And I think they need different kinds of intervention or different kinds of programming.
Eric, what happened to you?
There was water all over the seat, and I didn't see it.
Well, how did it get there?
I don't know.
What often happens, though, is that a classroom teacher will see it once a month, not a big deal. Said, okay, this probably just, I only saw this once. We have to realize that it probably happened 17 times behind his or her back. And I think what's even more important is to use some kind of central reporting system so that the person on the playground, the person in the lunchroom, the person in the halls, the person in the classroom is also beginning to identify who seems to be picked on, who seems to be the bully, because it's always a pattern. One of the myths about bullying is that they more often than not come from homes where they've been abused or where there's bullying going on at home. The majority of bullies come from homes that doesn't seem to have any reason why they might be the bully, but they have discovered that to be big and to be powerful, to be manipulative, to talk a good line, to not be truthful is a way to get what they want. They tend to be very suave and have a lot of social skills. We might like them a lot. They might be very charismatic. And so it may be very difficult for us to realize that they really indeed are bullying.
What happens when a bully is allowed to be a bully is the stakes increase. So where in kindergarten it's stealing someone's sandwich, it starts getting more violent and more aggressive, and there's some real negative consequences for that student. Eventually in life, it's going to get them in terrible relationships. You can't bully the people you're intimate with your wife and children and parents. It's a very dangerous and painful kind of position. And I think we can head people off earlier. It doesn't mean you can fix them all. In fact, you can't fix any of them. It's up to them. But you can create opportunities for kids to learn to get what they want through more constructive avenues.
All human beings have a need for affiliation, power, and achievement. The need for power is linked to the need for achievement and affiliation. And so schools need to recognize that and give those children a way to express those needs in a healthy way by having them participate in student government, by having them as safe patrols, by having them as helpers in the classroom and in the school, by recognizing something other than academic achievement in the school.
Victims usually do better with adults, so that's one way to identify them. They tend to sit with the lunchroom teacher and want to interact with adults because they aren't comfortable, because they don't feel like they can be themselves.
I think you need to take a close look sometimes. Sometimes it's just a shy person. Sometimes it may be somebody that somebody's given a rough time to. And I also think if you've got a situation where you see somebody in the corner or sitting in the sidelines in tears a lot, and when you ask them what's going on, they say, oh, it doesn't matter. You get that quite a bit. I think you need to look one step further.
Victims are difficult. And the reason that the victims are difficult is that mostly when I talk to staffs, and from personal experience, most people don't like to be around victims. They get pretty annoying after a while. And even though at first you feel like you can protect them, and they really are wonderful individuals, often sensitive, they often also don't have social skills.
On cafeteria duty, I saw what looked like a case of deliberate cruelty. A group of popular girls were eating together, but Jenny, who's usually in that group, was sitting all by herself in another area. The girls were whispering and looking at Jenny as if they were gossiping about her, and Jenny seemed pretty upset.
Girls bullying each other is different than maybe a fist fight or maybe, overt violence. Girls can just ostracize somebody or put somebody by themselves to make them feel lower or lesser than, or make them feel out of it.
Now remember, nobody talked to Paula, just to see what happened.
Sometimes it actually takes some really abusive forms, and you get girls being afraid to go to school, wanting to transfer school, not wanting to go at all, pretending they're sick, and that's just not okay. That becomes a real serious conference with the parents, conference with the girls, that this behavior is not acceptable here. We don't tolerate it.
Sometimes you have to wait and see whether or not it can work itself out. Because if you intervene every time you see something like that, you'd be pretty busy. And I think you have to know the kids. If you know that ultimately they may try to work the problem out for themselves, and that's the best possible scenario. On the other hand, if you feel like that this is something that's fairly consistent and it's happened over time, then you have to get the people together and talk about that.
I've seen situations where a group of girls will get up from a table once one girl comes to join them. And I immediately try to get the group that is walking away and ask them, what's going on here? And just try to get some knowledge. And then I quickly want to speak to the individual that was shunned, because at that point it's their feelings that are most vulnerable.
I tell them this is violence, this is bullying, and that it hurts my feelings, that I've had it done to me, so I know how it feels, and I've also done it. And I've talked to them about that I don't tolerate this kind of violence, and that I want them to work on whatever they need to say to this person, they need to do it in a gentle and kind way, and not by this kind of exclusion.
And that's tricky because you can't really legislate how people feel about other people, but you can start working towards helping them be accountable for their behavior, to really be thoughtful and mindful of what it is they're doing and the impact it has on others.
I said, I'm not telling you who you can be friends with. I would say, I'm telling you that everyone deserves respect.
One school I know had a bully in their school, and we're having a real hard time. This is a troublemaker kid, like at 6 years old, had troublemaker, and by the time that they went on, it's like troublemaker, big troublemaker. And somehow they noticed that he had this little little smile on his face when he had helped the teacher. But he was like, no, this is really stupid, I'm not going to do this. But there was a little twitch here. They ended up giving him to the custodian 15 minutes a day. And the custodian was doing a landscaping project. And he got all involved with that, and this is a true story. The other custodian said, well, how come he has a helper and I don't? And so then they gave a student to the other, and pretty soon there were teams helping the custodians. And he began to identify with the project of landscaping and planting. And that took care of a lot of those needs for power and authority and control, because it was part of this thing that was important to the school.
If you give them a healthy expression, an opportunity for a healthy expression of that need, we all have power needs. We all have affiliation needs. If you allow for a healthy expression of that need, then you're more likely to get a philanthropist instead of a criminal.
One school that I worked at, they have the I Don't Care Club, and victims and their parents come together once a week at school, and they talk about how to have a little bit thicker skin, how to learn some social skills, and how to realize that it's not about them when they're being made fun of, it's about the people who are making fun of them. And so they also see, well, lots of kids are made fun of, this is our club, and we can stand together, and there's strength in numbers.
I had a case when I was a teacher. I had this young man who used to call another kid in the classroom meathead. And I got them as freshmen, so he had been doing that from first grade all the way through. And a particular kid, Ronnie, never said to him, I don't like that. So we were having a class discussion one day about respect. And I happened to ask him, I said, Ronnie, how do you feel when they call you meathead? He said, I don't like it. And I said, have you ever said to anybody you didn't like it? He said, no. I said, why? He said, well, I was afraid to.
One fun one I've done with kids is to think of somebody very strong. Actually, I use this with adults too. But to think of someone very strong and who always knows what to say and pretend they're with you and imagine that they're saying the right thing and just do that. Say what they'd say.
They don't have the social skills that they need to interact with their peers. So we need to get them some help that way. Perhaps several people who will do a little tutoring in that way, in a gentle kind of way, saying, you know, it's like really uncool when you do that. But here's a way that you could do that. Because it's really annoying when you whine, or it's really annoying when you're always trying to be the teacher's pet. But here's a way that maybe would work.
So what I did is I got them together. And I said, the reason you're doing this is because you can get away with it. I said, there are people in this school you won't call that. I said, now, is that fair? And is that who you really are? He ended up crying. The bully ended up crying. And I said, you're a better person than that. You've hurt him for 8 years without knowing it. Now you know. What are you going to do? He said, I won't call him that anymore.
I hear more and more gay bashing at my school. Fag, lesy, queer, and worse are terms heard on the playground almost daily. Some of my colleagues say a little bit of homophobia is a normal part of early adolescence and not to take it so seriously. But a handful of students seem to be targeted the most, and I think they can't help but take it seriously.
I'd be sitting there, I'd be doing work, and you would hear that stupid lesbian up in the second row and third seat, and it's loud enough for me to hear it, which makes it loud enough for a teacher to hear it.
It's one of the most prevalent forms of bullying and name calling. It's one of the it's one of the most common. It's one of the most hurtful. It's one of the most it's a hot topic. It gets the whole community riled up, and therefore I think even more importantly we need to deal with it anytime we hear about that. Never let those terms go uncontested.
I think a lot of times we ignore that, or schools might ignore that in the same way they might ignore insulting someone who's fat, like, well, it is a bad thing. It's like not okay, it's not acceptable. And that's where our own values get into it. And from my perspective, they're name calling, they're not acceptable, it makes it unsafe, and if it's unsafe for one member of our community, it's unsafe for all of us. Anything goes.
They actually changed the teacher's name on the mailbox from Mr. to Miss. And everybody in school thought it was funny. And I didn't think it was funny at all. And I talked to him about it. And I apologized. And I also made it clear to him that it was not something that I supported, nor would I allow it to happen if I knew who did it. And I made a general announcement that it's inappropriate, that if I catch people doing things like that, that they will be sanctioned.
And I think the issue that teachers have a difficult time is when the parents come to them and say, you're advocating a certain lifestyle. And I say, no, I'm not. I'm advocating respect. Because I have had teachers adults come to me and say, when you even talk about homosexuality, you're advocating it. I said, we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about every human being deserves respect.
You have a conversation with the kids and their parents at the beginning of school about what you expect from kids in terms of their social behavior, what you expect from them in terms of their work ethic, responsibility, all those kinds of things.
What we know about children succeeding, one of the things that we know more than anything else is they need clear expectations and boundaries. So the earlier we set those expectations together with them, the sooner they can start meeting the expectations.
The way to do that, I think, would be to begin with some brainstorming efforts. What would you have in mind for what is a safe community? Do you feel safe? How does it feel when you're here? What would make you feel more comfortable? How could we create an atmosphere where people can be themselves and not worry about being made fun of?
A lot of students see rules as what not to do, but I see them as what should the classroom be. So my rule is simple. It's basically no rule except just respect. And with that one rule that they basically developed because through a discussion they come about that we just need respect. And it's interesting, all of the rules apply to that.
Kids are better governed by values than they are by rules. So let's say that a school has honesty as a value. It has respect as a value. It has the work ethic as a value. It has service as a value. Then you don't need rules. And if a kid does something inappropriately, you don't have to give the child a rule. All you have to say is that a respectful response? And that means that the child has to internalize that question.
This principal got really tired of rules. All the rules about what don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. So he devised 3 rules that he felt would really engender respect. And there are 3 rules that I find really useful that I use all the time are take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of this place.
The most constructive, positive way to deal with the whole issue of respect and behavior is to have everybody on school aboard with the same values about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. When that happens, there's a better shot that kids are going to pick up the information. But when I know that I can manipulate you or that you don't care about that or it doesn't matter to you, or I can call other people names when you're out in the playground and you won't do anything. So the lessons are lost. Actually, another lesson is taught. Then I can manipulate myself through any situation.
I think it's very important and that the teacher has a great responsibility to treat the children consistently and to treat them with respect because they are modeling the appropriate behaviors for the children. They would be able to confide upon me if they had to, out of the fact that I've always shown them so much respect. And they've seen me reinforce that with other students that may have been disrespectful at times.
It's the responsibility of the adults to create that environment because as they model that in their own relationships, because you have racial tensions on faculties, you have gender tensions, you have all kinds of tensions among adults, and that chemistry, that emotional contagion spreads itself throughout the school. So if children see people of different groups getting along well together and working together and planning for them, then they realize that that's appropriate and they begin to do that. If they see name calling, then they do that.
One of the ways that you teach respect is to break down barriers between people. So as much sharing of information and knowledge and relationship as you can do in the building is really important. So cross-age tutors, mentors, pals, buddies, any kind of thing where you connect people and let them know each other better is a way to build respect.
In the math class, you can talk about the quantitative manifestations of disrespect. Obviously, crime is a blatant form of disrespect. In a respectful society, you'd have a low crime rate. In a disrespectful society, you have a high crime rate, so it's statistics and that sort of thing. It's a question of being creative, and it's a question of creating a living environment where that's a value.
Our story was Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and our purpose was to teach people not to steal and to respect other people's property and their feelings. This would teach people a lesson because if they end up stealing or disrespecting someone's area or property, it's wrong. It could lead to violence or make somebody really mad.
The students found situations in the story or the problems in the story that were disrespectful in different ways. And we discussed what was disrespectful about stealing or what was disrespectful about lying. And then they changed the stories and altered them to have a respectful outcome and have something positive as a solution.
Our purpose of writing this, our moral, was that crime doesn't pay, because if you go out and spray paint on the walls, someone will figure it out sooner or later, and trampling over a garden isn't a good thing because you might get in trouble for that sooner.
And tell us what your fairy tale was so we can relate it.
Jack and the Beanstalk.
They're wonderful opportunities to identify with other people, to understand what other people are feeling. And through that process, it's the basis of all literature. We learn about ourselves and we learn about other people. And when we see other people struggling with issues of respect, we begin to identify, like, how does this apply to me? How do I connect?
When I was a middle school principal, I used to have family meetings with the kids once a month. That would probably be the most powerful thing we talked about throughout the year, about mutual respect, self-respect, and respect for others.
I'm a real strong proponent of classroom meetings on a regular basis, and I think that relieves teachers of a lot of pressure. Some of us feel that we're responsible for everything. I sometimes think that educators have this tremendously overdeveloped sense of responsibility, that we have to do it all. But a classroom meeting really transfers responsibility to the students. This is our room. What do we want to happen here?
I believe that kids love to be in a forum where they can talk about those issues. What I think has to happen, though, is that it has to be fairly structured in the beginning. And it has to be followed up by demonstrations of behaviors that suggest that not only do I know what respect is, but I'm going to carry out respectful behavior. And so it shouldn't just be a theoretical discussion or an abstract discussion about respect. It should be a discussion as a first phase of trying to get kids to behave respectfully.
And we really have to, as a culture, realize when something's happening, I need to be part of that. I need to get involved. I need to say something when it's offensive to me. I need to say something when someone else is being hurt, and how much courage that takes.
Solve the problem using the big word, the key word starts with the R. Respect. Respect. Is that what you're going to say?
I put together a lunchtime jigsaw group, and I called jigsaw because everybody is a different shape or design, but in order to work, we need to all come together. And by coming together, we're making one total unified design, and that's important. So we each made it important that the first few sessions we came together and discussed what was different about us and what was similar about us, and found out a lot about each other, that even though these girls or boys thought they had been friends and knew everything about each other, we found out a lot more just by discussing and talking about it. We also spend a lot of time coming up with problems that they're facing daily or during that week and solving it. And it's just basically their time to discuss it, and their time where there's no feelings that they're going to be hurt, no feelings that they're going to make a bad choice, because I'm just discussing ways to deal with different feelings of disrespect.
That's such an age where people are trying to figure out who they are, what they believe in, how they're the same as others and different. And so this gives them an opportunity, a forum to do that, where they're heard and they have an opportunity to listen. It's a critical thing to do, to take that time to reflect and think about, am I doing a good job with that already, and to validate what you're already doing, and possibly to learn some more skills. How can I do this better? There's a lot of violence and a lot of pain in the world, and I think school can be a very safe haven to learn some skills that we can transfer out into the world.
So whether that's the hall that I'm in charge of or the room that I happen to teach in, as an adult, it's my responsibility to create a community and to engage students in helping me create a community where we're all working towards the same kinds of safe environment, and safe on an emotional as well as physical level.
Modern American teachers, you really have the most difficult job in the history of American education. The kind of support that teachers got 30 and 40 years ago is not quite there today. On the other hand, you're doing the most noble work in the history of American education. I think what teachers should understand is that teaching is reaching. Unless there is a foundation of respect, mutual respect in the classroom, kids will not be taught well. And so the social climate in the classroom, the climate of respect and positive regard, has to exist in order for children to do well. So you need to invest time early on in the school year in having classroom discussions and talking to parents about not only what you want the kid to be academically, but what you want the kid to be ethically.